I'm thrilled that the Congressman is going to participate in our panel discussion, and I want to introduce you to a set of really terrific panelists that we have. Yesterday's noon plenary really began the conversation that we are going to continue today. Critical partnerships are being created in the Obama administration that involve not just all of you, but members of Congress, philanthropic organizations, the development community. We all bring different perspectives, expertise, strong opinions to the table, and this is an opportunity for us to hear some of those opinions and some of those points of view. The main locus of collaboration has been around the new partnership among the White House, EPA, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the Department of Transportation, what they're calling the Partnership for Sustainable Communities. I'm very proud, on a personal side note, to have created the office at EPA a little bit more than 10 years ago that's now part of this wonderful partnership. But it's really a completely blank slate in many ways. What that partnership is going to be, how it's going to work, how the different parties are going to play different roles. So let me introduce our panelists, and I think each of them are going to have a perspective to bring on the kind of partnership that they would like to see. Let me begin to the right of the stage with Jonathan Rose. Jonathan leads Jonathan Rose Companies, LLC, a multidisciplinary real estate development planning and consulting firm. He's a thought leader, I think I can safely say, in smart growth, national infrastructure, green buildings, and affordable housing movements. He's also a trustee of several organizations, including the Urban Land Institute, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and Enterprise Community Partners. He chairs the Metropolitan Transit Authority's Blue Ribbon Sustainability Commission. He also serves on the leadership councils of both Yale University School of Forestry and Environmental Studies and the Yale School of Architecture. And this is my favorite thing, my favorite little note. He occasionally blogs on the Huffington Post. So we'll look for something after this conference. To his right is Mac McCarthy. Mac is a director, a program director at the Ford Foundation. I know many of you know Ford, but for those of you that don't, Ford is a foundation that works with visionary leaders and organizations around the world. They were founded to advance social justice, and all their work flows from this fundamental commitment. Ford was first chartered in 1936, and they've distributed to date almost $16 billion worldwide. Their assets in fiscal year 2008 were about $11 billion. Lots of people apply for grants at Ford, about 40,000 a year. They don't give everyone money. They award about 2,000 grants each and every year. Their grant-making program is led by directors who work with a talented cadre of program officers. These folks are experts in their fields, recruited from universities, nonprofits, public and private sectors for 6-year terms, which I think is unusual. They kind of believe in bringing that expertise in, but then having it for a relatively short period of time. I think they don't want people to go native in the foundation and send them back out into the world. George is one of those directors, one of those folks who's in the middle of a 6-year stint. He's the director of Metropolitan Opportunity, and his work seeks to provide low-income people with better access to jobs and opportunities by supporting regional planning efforts, transportation investments, and housing development policies that alleviate poverty and reduce its concentration in metropolitan areas. So I know Mac is very excited about these partnership opportunities with the Obama administration. He previously administered a program that focused on using home ownership to build assets for low-income families in their communities. Before joining Ford, he worked as a senior research associate at the Center for Urban and Regional Studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. To his right is John Porcari. John is the Deputy Secretary of Transportation, and he was sworn in on June 1st of 2009. As Deputy Secretary, he serves as the department's Chief Operating Officer with responsibility for the day-to-day operation of the 10 modal administrations and the work of more than 55,000 DOT employees nationwide and overseas. Many of you know John, but because before becoming Deputy Secretary, John was one of our leading lights among state DOTs. He served as the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Transportation since January of 2007, but that's a position he also held in the Glendenning administration between 1999 and 2003, where we were colleagues. The Maryland Department of Transportation encompasses responsibilities for transit, highways, ports, aviation, toll authorities, and motor vehicles. And his accomplishments in that position include transforming the state's capital program for transportation to require all projects to be consistent with the principles of smart growth, overseeing the $1.4 billion expansion of the Baltimore-Washington International Airport, and a plan to double transit ridership in the state by 2020. So, let us begin our conversation. Let's welcome our panelists, first of all. So the first thing I want to do is begin with our panelists and ask them the question that I know all of us are thinking about, which is, what is the kind of partner that they'd like the federal government to be? Like, we've been waiting, all of us, a long time to answer this question. And we know in a lot of ways the federal government sets the rules of the game, provides most of the money, but we're a lot of us not always so happy with the results. So what is the kind of partner that we're looking for in the federal government? And let me begin with Jonathan.
Thank you, Harriet. Is this coming through? So the kind of partner I'd really love to have is an integrated partner. There are, with the right values and principles, which Earl so eloquently spoke about, there are tremendous resources in the federal government. Our goal is to build livable communities that really integrate mixed use, mixed income, ecologically and socially responsible development. And to do that, we need to draw from all of the agencies. We need to have a reconciliation of their policies. I'd love for larger scale projects to see a supernova that draws from EPA, energy, transportation, and housing. So really, we'd love to see integrated resources because, as Earl noted, it's on the ground we have to tie them all together. So it'd be great if from the financial side, coming from the feds and regulatory side, they were also integrated.
Mac, what do you think?
So I think that there's really three things we need in a partnership with the federal government. I think we need the government to take leadership on the issues. And when I say leadership, I don't mean listening and I don't mean consensus building. And I think that while listening and consensus building can be part of the process the leaders engage in, I think what we really need to do is have the leadership of the government have the courage to set very broad and ambitious goals and then engage the partners in helping to make sure those goals can be achieved. And I would say, as the representative told us before, that I think that climate change is an overarching goal that we can use to organize ourselves around, and I think it's probably the right one. But instead of just talking about minimizing climate change, I think we should set an ambitious goal of reversing climate change and reducing the carbon load in the atmosphere below 350 parts per million. When we say that and we figure out, then we figure out how to actually do that. And I think a good model to think about how we actually do that is already being demonstrated in California with SB 375, and the efforts to implement that by really changing urban design is one of the key components of doing that. But then in addition, I think we need, in a good partnership, to really define and clarify the roles of all the partners. And part of that is to understand that each of the partners are bringing a particular perspective and need to bring that perspective to make the partnership work. So for example, philanthropy, is particularly from the Ford Foundation and others, is going to be looking at social equity. We want to make sure that anything we do, the process we engage in, actually attends to that key kind of core principle of ours. And I think that we should, in the partnership then, engage the partners to help to establish the principles through which the entire effort will be undertaken. So we'll be bringing the principle of social equity. Others might be bringing in the principles of efficiency and participation, and that's all good as well. The third thing is that we need to be really, really clear about the roles that different partners play. And what I mean by that is I think that we have to be mindful of the assets and the limitations of partners, and we have to make sure that we put the resources of all the partners that are engaged to the highest and best use. And I'll just give you an example of a way in which we haven't been doing that. I just came from Washington. I was meeting with a whole group of community development finance institutions who have been trying to work with Treasury to get some of the TARP money that has been poured out to save some of the largest financial institutions in the world, dedicated to some better community practices. This community development finance institutions actually aren't sitting on a lot of tarnished assets because they've actually been performing well. They asked for maybe $1 billion of $800 billion worth of TARP money that went out, and the Treasury told them, why don't you get foundations to kick in $100 million of assets so you guys could do your work better, and this isn't really what the government should be doing. Yeah. I think that if you think about the kind of assets and the kind of skills and abilities that different partners bring, you would know that $100 million of foundation resources, which are very nimble and very useful to have, would not best be dedicated for lending capital for community development finance institutions. It should be coming from the government. And so a government partner should not be looking at other partners as expedient allies to do things that they don't feel like doing. They should look at other partners as the kind of allies that bring critical resources that should be dedicated to their best use. And, and finally, I think that in all partnerships should honor and understand the idea that partnerships work best when partners push each other out of their comfort zone. And I think that we're going to have to get used to the fact that in a partnership, you don't all just generate a consensus and then move along in that consensus. What you have to do is you have to push each of us to be better. And that includes government pushing philanthropy to think a little bit differently, philanthropy pushing government to think a little differently, and both of us pushing the private sector to behave a little differently. So I'll end there.
Great. Well, Congressman Blumenauer, we got to hear a little bit from you, but I'd like to know if you'd like to weigh in on this particular question. I mean, you've had a chance to, over your many years in Congress, to find the federal government to be either a pretty good partner or someone who basically wasn't home. So my question to you is, yes, what kind of a partner are you looking for the federal government to be on the issues you care most about?
Well, I think you just heard two statements that I couldn't agree with more. Part of what needs to happen is that the federal government needs to be willing to have a lighter touch, to let go a little bit. It's not just the bureaucracy. It's not just the administration or the civil service. It's Congress. I mean, we have all these goofy stovepipes, and we have the jurisdiction, we have committees that are at log. I mean, this is, Speaker Pelosi created our select committee because there were 8 different committees that had a piece of the action. And some of them weren't excited about it. But just by virtue of putting together the select committee and having the hearings and moving things, it helped break a little of the logjam. But we need to have a lighter touch with the federal government. It requires a certain degree of self-confidence on the part of the administration and Congress. It needs to be performance-driven. I mean, this is part of what I am getting from the earlier comments. Hold people accountable. I mean, we've got tools that we can make sure that they perform. I mean, people will be looking at various and sundry community development block grants, transportation money for decades to come. If they don't perform, we can hold them accountable and penalize or get repaid for things that don't. But being willing to do that, changing the incentives for people actually accomplishing the mission. Part of the problem with EPA's Superfund is that the powers that be in the past wouldn't reenact the Superfund tax, so there wasn't much money. But the mindset, sadly, is one of sue, stall, and study, not clean up. And I've seen examples where people have come in and say, we want to clean this up. How, EPA, can we clean up this Superfund? And they don't have an answer. I think this crew has the potential of doing that. Lighter touch, performance-driven, a new partnership with Congress and the administration that holds people accountable and allows them to do what we know needs to be done.
Okay. John Porcari, you're a brave man to be up here representing the administration. Everyone is bringing their basket full of hopes and aspirations for for you in particular, but also for your partners at HUD and EPA and at the White House. What are your thoughts about how you're trying to reform, particularly the Department of Transportation, to be the kind of partner that people have said they'd like to be working with at the federal government?
Well, first of all, I'm with you all in spirit here. Until recently, I was on the outside knocking on the door, looking in. And first, on the partnership, it helps when you have committed individuals. And, for example, Ron Sims and I knew each other and were co-conspirators before we got into these respective jobs and tried to get a head start at this. But and it helps when you have a sense of shared mission. And I think that is certainly true. And that clearly comes from the top down in the administration, from the president and his senior staff. So we're committed to doing it differently. We are sometimes tripping over ourselves to make that happen. But some of the early results of that collaboration with HUD and EPA are maybe not visible to everyone, but really important. Things like changing some of our own rules and regulations, some of our legal requirements that have actually prevented us from working together, that work against affordable housing at some of our transit projects. This is a lot of tinkering under the hood, but it's really critical to do it. The other part of it is the Congressman is right. We need to be less prescriptive and more performance-based. We need to look at the outcomes, not necessarily the inputs to what we're doing. The way our programs are stovepiped in transportation now, there's about 110 of them. It's kind of the beat to fit option. We have to take the existing programs and beat them until they fit the local need. And that may work, but you can't do that forever. So if you think about both the short term, what we have to do, and longer term, right now we have to work with what we have and make it work. And that partnership is one of the ways we're doing it. With the reauthorization in particular, that's our opportunity. Fewer, less prescriptive programs, performance-based, focused on clearly definable goals and hold people accountable. And when we talk about this partnership, the federal part of it's fine. That's probably a precursor to getting things done. It doesn't work without our local partners. And when you think about land use, when you think about priority setting at the local and regional level, the results are only as good as that partnership. And that's clearly where we're focusing. I'm very excited that the one flexible thing we have actually came to us through the Recovery Act, which are the Tiger grants. And the criteria are things like intermodal projects, regional and national significance, the kinds of things that we haven't been able to do before. And think of that as kind of our dress rehearsal for how a program should be run.
I'm so eager to talk about the Tiger grants. I might jump right into that, but I think that they represent the possibility of a different way of funding transportation, and I think it's no great surprise that the federal government, the DOT, received $57 billion worth of applications for $1.5 billion in funds. Those applications came from 1,400 different applicants, and so part of what I know we're all interested in, both for reauthorization, but in general, is building a constituency for change. And certainly that initial Tiger application process seems to have stirred up a lot of interest in a different way of funding transportation. Congressman Blumenauer alluded to some of the complications in Congress. That is one of the places where we really need that constituency for change. Let me just ask our panelists to weigh in on the topic of how do we best build that constituency for change in Congress and in communities, so that we can see a different way of funding transportation. And let me just begin with Mac on that.
Thanks, Harriet. So one of the things that we've noted at Ford is the absolute absence of kind of the traditional historic civil rights organizations from weighing in on the transportation debate. And yesterday we heard from Mike Dukakis about kind of the success they had in Boston in preventing the interstate highway system from running right through the heart of Boston. And Mike told it as a story of really kind of maintaining the legacy of the Emerald Necklace and Frederick Olmsted, or Law Olmsted's great planning work. But in fact, when that happened, I was actually living as a kid in Hyde Park, right on Hyde Park Avenue, which is right on the right-of-way that was going to go through Boston. And in fact, that was just one of many neighborhoods that would have been gutted by the interstate highway system, which included Roxbury, Mattapan, many of which were heavily populated by minorities and low-income families. Now, it was a very good story that people were able to prevent the gutting of Boston's Emerald Necklace or its low-income neighborhoods by the interstate highway system, but it wouldn't have happened if we didn't have very rich allies in Milton and in Cambridge who were able to really organize and fund litigation and other things to prevent that from happening. Unfortunately, that's one of the few success stories of preventing the interstate highway system from destroying cities and neighborhoods. And you can see that evidence in hundreds of cities around the country now, in Treme and in New Orleans or in West Oakland, where now what is called Martin Luther King Boulevard is where the interstate highway used to just kind of came in and destroyed that community and was removed after the earthquake in 1989. So I think that transportation spending is a civil rights issue, and I don't think that the civil rights groups have been able to figure out how to organize around it and to whom they would organize and advocate. Because one of the problems with transportation is it's not planned at the typical jurisdictional levels that people want to work. So we're working to build that constituency within the civil rights organizations to say, look, we need to weigh in on how transportation money is spent, and we need to make sure that it's spent in ways that really attend to the needs of low-income and marginalized communities, because it hasn't been. And it's not just in the highways, it's in the highways and it's in the public transportation system as well. So I think that until we get those voices to the table, and I think we need to get those voices to the table, we're not going to make all the best decisions regarding transportation spending. And I think that one of the things we have to keep in mind is we don't get there with planning by design. Because when I talk to a lot of my friends and colleagues, many of whom are ULI members, when I tell them that we shouldn't have been building interstate highways through low-income neighborhoods and cities, many of them said, well, where else are you going to build? That's where the land is cheap. And I said, well, in that case, we need to raise the price. And we don't need to raise the price monetarily. We can raise it politically in other ways.
Jonathan, well, so the development community as a constituency, are they engaged? Are they avidly watching the transportation reauthorization issues? Are they paying attention to things like the Tiger Grant program that's part of the Recovery Act? How is the development community participating, and what can we do to bring more of them into this debate on the side of real reform?
So the development community has actually dramatically shifted and is actively debating, is actively engaged and deeply in favor of mass transit, in part because the market has changed. And if we need a suburban sprawl, we built more than enough. There's really, the recent economic crisis was in part fueled by unnecessary or inappropriate overfunding of suburban sprawl. There's more than enough stuff out there that we don't need to build another McMansion out in the suburbs. And yet what we're seeing is the barbell of two parts of demand. One is seniors who are actually less interested now in retiring to golf course communities and really want to be near universities or back in healthy, active downtowns. And back in the downtowns where their kids and grandkids are in their cities and not retiring somewhere else. And the second thing is bright young people who are just getting out of school don't want to live in Sprawlsville either. They want to live downtown. So the market is driving. And if you look at the current economics, the foreclosure rate is much, much higher out in the very end of the suburbs. Downtown projects are slow, but are surviving and are much healthier. So the development community actually understands that transit, by the way, if you see 5 years ago, when you saw a building advertised, there would be nothing about its transit. The building is anywhere close to transit-oriented development, transit now. The first thing in an ad, if a building's for sale or for rent or for lease, is its transit qualities. So the development community is really, really enthusiastic about this. But I do have two other ideas, just briefly, that would really help foster more a culture of interest in transit. And one is that every federal program have a location efficiency attached to it. So if every VA hospital had to be near transit, if every federal program required transit efficiency, that would then force this because remember, anyway, that would force more of a systems thinking. And the second one is that we need new indicators of community health. We use GDP, we use VMT, a couple hard items, but if we really had a more integrated community health indicator system that really talked about the qualities that Earl talked about human health and quality of life, automatically, if you're trying to maximize your community health indicators, you're going to be driven towards a transit-based solution.
Well, I appreciate the specifics there, and I think that's a very important thing. And we have such a knowledgeable audience that I'd like us to get a little bit more specific. I'd like us to ponder a couple of questions. If these partnerships were successful, how would you know it? And for some of the programs, I know you've beat your head against against the rules at HUD regarding how CDBG or home funds can be spent at DOT. I mean, your old boss famously called the New Starts program the No Starts program. That would be Governor O'Malley, and now you're in a position where you might be able to do something about that. So let's have a little bit of let's spend a few minutes talking about some specific things that we know are broken, that need to be fixed, because I know part of the pressure is not necessarily the grandest of designs, but to be able to build momentum for change, to have incremental success, to be able to tangibly show that you are making changes, and that would create momentum and more of this constituency for additional and more ambitious change. So John, let's start with you and talk about what is it that you're hearing the most flack about, and maybe New Starts is where you'd like to begin.
This is a really important point, because if you come away with anything from my perspective today, hopefully it's that we need some facts on the ground. We need early successes. We talk about livability. I think we all have our own definitions of it, but you know it when you see it. We have a lot of momentum for it, but that's only going to work in the long term if we can point to some actual successes around the country. And that's, I think, our collective job is to make sure that we have those early successes. Before I get to New Starts, Jonathan, one thing you mentioned is very close to home here, your VA hospital example. How many here know that 2 weeks ago the President signed an executive order that had a number of energy efficiency? Well, Congressman, you can't answer this, because I know you know. But it had a number of energy efficiency requirements in it, but it also had specific requirements for locating federal facilities near transit. That was a big win for us. And we've been working directly, when we talk about partnerships at the federal level, we've been working directly with the Commissioner of Public Buildings at GSA to actually make that a reality, because he's a change agent too. So there really are good things happening behind the scenes. Peter Rogoff, our Federal Transit Administrator, is here today, and he is working very hard he and his team we have an internal New Starts working group, and yes, it really is the No Starts, has been working group. And from my perspective, again, coming from state DOT, it was very good at what it was designed to do, which was limit federal financial participation, and it was extraordinarily good at that, actually. But what the New Starts working group is actually doing is looking at changing the process, looking at what the outcomes are, and the big kind of the elephant in the room is the use of the cost benefit as the gatekeeper for whether or not a project is funded, rather than one of a number of criteria. We are limited at the present in what we can do on that, but I point that out because that's such an obvious limitation on what the intention of the New Starts process and program is, that's something that we need to fix. We're confident that we're going to have some recommendations that make a lot of sense. We'll be working within the administration and Congress to implement those, but those are the idea would be more flexible, link it to performance measures, and so we could actually see the outcomes and measure the outcomes. It's a really exciting time in transportation because the sea change really I think collectively all of us are too close to it to actually see it. What we're explicitly saying is that transportation is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. It's an enabler. And whether your goal is livability or economic development, that it's a way to get there, it's a tool. And from Secretary LaHood on down, that's really how we're looking at it. And it applies equally, by the way, to high-speed rail.
Great. I'm going to throw out a specific to ponder. This came up at a meeting a couple of days ago among some state DOT directors and some of the members of your team and the Sustainable Communities Partnership. A lot of local governments, particularly in this economic crisis and after 8 years of having increasing demands being pushed down from the states, who had demands pushed down from the federal government, the localities are pretty strapped for resources. But the holy grail of what we've been talking about at this conference for 15 years is connecting land use and transportation.
Absolutely.
What about allowing local governments to make land use part or all of their local match for transit projects? What possibilities might there be to do that? We know enough to be able to monetize what the value is of that, and how, Congressman Blumenauer, you're smiling. We know.
You're evil, Harriet.
I'm just throwing it out there.
Question.
Yeah, just a question. So maybe we can get some reaction from our panelists to some of those ideas. Jonathan.
One of the great things about being on a panel is hearing amazing new ideas, and that is an amazing new idea. What I would modify it slightly and say that it should have an affordable housing. It should have an affordable housing requirement, and it should have a zoning. So the match would not be the match would be the increase, I presume, of density that in zoning. So community would come and say, we're going to create much higher density zoning. We're going to commit. They're going to have inclusionary zoning or something that really builds some affordable housing with that. And I think that's a fabulous idea.
Yeah. We have been doing this. The irony that was made, the comment, well, where else would you put these facilities?
Right.
Because that's where the cheap land is. Well, it was only cheap until the infrastructure was installed. There have been study after study that suggested that if we would have just retained the land around the interchanges and auctioned it off, it would have paid for the entire interstate freeway system without levying a penny of gas tax. It's where we located the railroads. The opportunity for us to think about value capture, because in the past that has been allocated to either the lucky or the well-connected. I would be prepared to argue that it's probably the latter rather than the former. There is all sorts of value that we are creating with our infrastructure, and being more thoughtful about how we allow local communities to meet their match requirements, I think is fundamental. It's something we have just allowed this value to leak out in ways that haven't been captured in a thoughtful way. The same way that our formulas are turned on their head. I mean, we reward, in the transportation system, we reward people, you get extra points if your bridges are falling down, if you're congested, if you've got bad air quality. Somehow this qualifies you for more money. And the people that are doing the job, give me a break. This is, in my judgment, a chance with the new administration, with the reauthorization, with what we know out here, when we want to have an economy that is capturing the value and doing real things, providing real value to people, this is the moment. And I think more and more people are sensitized to it.
So Harriet, you asked us a minute ago how we would know if we're making progress on the partnerships, and I think that one of the other holy grails that we're looking at is concurrency between federal systems and local systems. And one of the big problems we have right now is we have, compartmentalized and siloed federal systems. We also have local systems that aren't really configured to kind of work with an integrated federal government. And so developing the right kind of rules that generate the concurrency at the local level with new kind of federal guidelines and goals would be evidence that we're actually getting to where we want to go. And I think this is a fabulous idea, a great way to actually start that.
So let me just make sure that I understand what you're suggesting, that we have the beginning of a beautiful friendship among DOT, HUD, and EPA at the federal level, but in truth, those same equivalent agencies at the local level aren't always talking to each other. They're not always working together. So are you suggesting that localities begin to organize themselves in similar ways to begin to address these issues?
I'm not just suggesting it. That's one of the things we'll be investing in, and we're going to be trying to make that happen. And we're going to obviously go to the places which are most inclined to do that first. We're hoping that it becomes the rule, not the exception.
So maybe some of the people in the room would like to be some of those places that are thinking about that first.
Wouldn't they?
Just
I'm sure.
A small tip. Yeah. Jonathan.
So we're all on this is the right path. So then there's some tools that are needed to do that. And the first is integrated planning. And currently under the system, if transportation planning goes through MPOs, infrastructure, water and sewer infrastructure goes through the SRF program, HUD planning goes through the CHAS program. They're all separate. We have GIS now. We should really be doing one integrated planning strategy for a community that ties all these programs together at the community level.
Well, you raise a really interesting question when you say that, because these are two goals that I think are in competition. John Porcari really talked about the need to show progress, and to have some quick wins. We know how long it could take to do a regional plan, especially to integrate both a large geography and a lot of issues that hadn't previously been integrated. So I see those things as potentially in conflict with each other, the need to show rapid progress, and quite frankly, the need to have something well along enough that the actual transportation reauthorization discussion could be influenced by some of that early success, and the need to do something transformative at the local level, at the regional level, that's meaningful. So how do we reconcile those two issues, the need to show quick progress, yet the need to plan at a scale that fits the problem?
To some extent, this is self-selected. There are communities out there that have a lot of capacity, that have worked at this very hard and are pretty far along. And in the short term, it really means helping those who help themselves. This really works. This is not a federal solution. This works when communities have achieved a consensus on a vision, on implementing it, and transportation is an element of that. That particular transportation balance is then what we can help with. But I do want to underscore the need for some early wins here, some facts on the ground, because as much momentum as we have, we can't keep it without projects for people to point to. One other quick point about value capture, because Harriet, you brought up a really interesting idea. I'd also argue that on value capture, Congressman, we need to be a little more sophisticated about how we do it. Transit-oriented development, for example, let's think about what sustains transit in the long term, not just what builds station development. And that's the local transit agencies being equity partners. That's operating returns year after year that help maintain those systems. If think from a private developer's perspective, how you would want to do it, and it would be that kind of equity participation where you're actually a long-term partner, and the biggest problem you have on transit is the long-term operating costs, and cover that in part through that value capture.
So are you suggesting, John, that maybe in the future, as we put together applications for new starts or other things, not only are local governments potentially showing how they have change their zoning to create a mixed use and to have a greater density to have, let's say, inclusionary zoning as part of the package to get to the affordability issues. They're also maybe talking about how they've created a business improvement district that is willing to levy a fee that will allow the operating expenses of the new transit investment to be covered for the foreseeable future. Is that the sort of thing we're talking about?
That's absolutely along the lines, but that's something that together we really need to determine. And again, if you think about surface transportation reauthorization, there's real opportunities to think about this differently.
Well, let's talk about reauthorization. We heard from Congressman Blumenauer about the bill that Congressman Oberstar is sponsoring, that's out there, that could be tweaked, that could have some have benefit from some of the folks here in this room weighing in. But I think there's also the issue of potentially an extension. The administration has suggested an 18-month extension. We have, what are we going to have? Continued 30-day? Are we going to have a 3-month, a 6-month, or 9-month? Let me ask a question in a more idealized way. What are our panelists' perspectives on what's the best approach for reauthorization, and what are the implications of something other than the best approach being happening? How is that going to affect your own planning, like the grantees that you're going to fund and the work that you might be doing at Ford? Or Jonathan, how is that going to affect how the development community gets mobilized, whether they're looking at a series of 30-day extensions, whether they're looking at something longer term? What do you think about reauthorization? What's your preference about how we go?
Unfortunately, it's a political issue because the clear preference is a huge bill that is diverse and integrated, that has multiple funding sources, that gets done now. But politics doesn't seem to be getting us there. I would say from a real estate development community point of view, that not just the real estate developers, but our funders look for a certain kind of certainty. And we're not going to get the financing for projects, for example, TOD projects, till we know the T is there. And so the reauthorization is really critical to unleashing the next step. I would say, by the way, I think a critical component of reauthorization is in the design of the program is really a series of last mile solutions. Because we are going to rebuild over time. It's going to take too long and it's going to be too difficult, but eventually we're going to bring back the heavy rail, high-speed rail, light rail, commuter rail system. But if we don't permeate that back out with transit-based solutions to every home and business, we're not going to be able to create the livable communities we want.
The Congressman urged us in his remarks that in all the things that we do, that we need to be bold, right? We need to think big.
Right.
Are we doing that in this transportation bill? Not
big enough, not bold enough.
Well, I'm going to answer your last question first. I'm not even going to answer your second question because I already forgot what it was. I think that we need two things. I think we need time and we need certainty. And I think that we need time for two reasons. For our purposes, to really be able to build the right kind of constituency to really weigh in on the decisions that are going to be made in the reauthorization. So, we just need time to do that. We also need time to do that because I think we need to help the government get reconfigured first, because if we reauthorize without getting kind of the systems in place, then we're very likely to be dumping money out through the same old channels that don't work now, right? So we need to figure that out first. And so if it's 18 months, let's call it 18 months and stick to that, and then begin the process of making sure that we get all the other pieces in place before that. Or if it's 9 months, but let's not do 30-day extensions and keep everybody on tenterhooks. It's not going to do anybody any good.
Gentlemen, would either of you like to weigh in on this topic?
I'm eager to hear what Congressman has to say.
Congressman, you won't be surprised that I'm supporting the administration's proposal here. 18 months.
He's good. He's good.
And the reason for the 18-month extension is, first, a series of 30-day extensions cause havoc in the transportation system on everything from maintenance to larger projects like transit projects that a state DOT secretary is not going to start if you're looking at 30-day extensions and you have that kind of uncertainty. 18 months is a reasonable time frame to have these conversations and try to build a consensus on some of the big changes that we know, the central elements that we know need to be in a surface transportation bill.
Is that 18 months running from last June?
When it was originally proposed, yes. It's obviously a moving target at this point.
Well, and the 18-month extension was from the 30th of September, the expiration. Mm-hmm. So that takes us into the next Congress. I think the administration's position is logical given where they're at and the support they get. But I would just suggest that what Congress needs to do, we just extended it to December 18th with the vote on the CR. So this is the second extension. I lived through 12 of those with the last administration, as did everybody on this stage and most of you in this room. And it's like cocaine. I mean, you know, it's just easier to keep punting and dodging. We need to, there's the notion that it's going to be easier to deal with the big funding questions in the next Congress in a run-up to a presidential election, I think is questionable. Mm-hmm. We can put this bill together before the next construction cycle. There is a great start, but it's only a start. And there is expertise in this administration, unlike we have seen, and a couple of shirt-sleeve sessions over a course of a week, running this stuff up, refining it. I think we can have a bill that we can all be proud of with literally a month's work. The question is whether the month will be sometime between now and the spring, or whether it's going to be sometime in the next Congress. And if there is any variable in the 4 committees that are involved with this, it sets us back. You know, there's an indictment, there's a death, there's somebody who runs for something else. You know, you just start changing the landscape. I don't disagree with what the administration has done. It's Congress's job to see if we get our act together with both the revenue base and working between the House and the Senate. But this is within our capacity. The problem I see with the kicking it down the road until March of 2011, it's not just that it's a new Congress, but we keep having to backfill with general fund money. We've had transfer money now to just keep it afloat. And the only way what is being proposed for an 18-month extension is we're going to have to put a lot more general fund money in some fashion. And I think most directors of Department of Transportation are going to not risk really big things if we have that uncertainty. And it continues to erode the general fund base. So from my vantage point, the administration, I understand. It's Congress that needs to step up, do our job. We can do this in 4 or 5 months. And I think if I have every confidence that if we do our job in the next few months, that the administration will respond to do what needs to be done to help us fine-tune it. And that's still my goal.
Okay. Well, let me follow up with you, Congressman, on this question. I mean, I think you've certainly made the point very forcefully that there are risks in waiting to a new Congress to do this, and that who knows what that composition will be, who knows how things might change. Very unpredictable. But at the same time, a lot of what we've been talking about here on the stage today is about the change that's beginning to happen administratively and the constituency that's being built out there across America for a different way of doing business, whether it's the excitement around the $8 billion high-speed rail initiative that's kind of caused entirely new organizations and entirely new ways of collaborating to form. I would argue that the Tiger grants have done the same thing, and even though obviously most of the grant applicants are not going to get what they've requested, they have begun to do projects and to plan and to work together in ways that they have never done before. And whether or not they get that money, many of these efforts are going to continue. And that has been what the catalytic promise of a new way of funding has begun to do. So the more time that, not an infinite amount of time, but the more time that could elapse would enable some of these constituencies to get better organized and potentially be in a more fruitful dialogue with their members of Congress about what kind of changes that they would like to see. What's your reaction to that, or any of our panelists to that notion?
I don't think communities are going to let up. I mean, even without the economic recovery package, people have been doing this at the local level. When the community understands the project, that they are empowered and they're a part of it, and they see where it's going, they vote for park and recreation. They vote for transit. They vote for specific projects. I just am of the opinion that there is a sense of urgency now that, and in part, the administration has set the table. I mean, this unparalleled participation. You get the three, EPA, housing, transportation, right there, locked arms. This is so cool. The things that are happening through administrative rule, but I fear actually that if we don't move quickly, if Congress doesn't do its part, that actually we're going to have people going off doing things that will be suboptimal because they don't have the appropriate federal assistance. There will be others that will be discouraged. And I think in terms of both the urgency of protecting the planet and restoring the economy, the next few months are, I think, are critical. And so I'm of the opinion we want to strike while the iron is hot when we've got this great team and when the public is moving. We have a chance to harness it rather than have it dissipate.
Okay.
I think Earl pointed out something very important, that the recession and the financial crisis was not only very dispiriting to people, but it actually opened up. People said, consumption is not good enough. That the way we've been living has not been working. The suburban sprawl is really, anyway, you get all that part. And there was an opening in which the public consciousness said, we really would like to find a new way, and a hunger for the creation of more livable communities and more true value in people's lives. When the economy starts steaming again, that is likely to fall aside as people kind of get caught up again in the business as usual. This is the opportunity to tap into that desire, that emergent desire, but not, and this is where Mac's point about leadership comes in. It's an emergent desire. It needs to be framed with a clear vision, and we can build a constituency about it, but that's going to take leadership, and this door is beginning to close, so we have to capture this moment now.
Let me ask one final question of our panelists. I mean, John has been a really good sport to represent the administration and to react on the fly to all of our different thoughts, ideas, and even critiques. Let's do him a favor and let's give him some of our last advice. He's established that he feels a sense of urgency. He needs, to show progress very quickly. What's a final piece of advice you would give to John, his colleagues at EPA and HUD, and the White House about how to make this Sustainable Communities Partnership both a reality and a success in the short term? What can he do? Mac.
I think that we really need a statement and a direction that all parties can take simultaneously with real kind of certainty. And I think that we need to embark on a path. So let's just say, I mean, we need to decide right now, not right now on the stage, but very soon, is reauthorization going to be in 18 months? And then we need to work together to figure out the tactics that we're going to need to put in place to build the right constituencies, to put the right pieces in place. If it's going to be 9 months, we do the same thing. But we need to actually make a decision now, and we need to have the kind of the courage to take that decision and stick with it and then move in the right direction with it. I think we need to then really identify a few key things that we should be organizing around. And I think that if we're all going to be leaders, then we have to be leaders in the sense of the old form of leadership where you get people to do things they wouldn't otherwise have done because it's the right thing to do. And so I think that when we start to tackle kind of the revenue problem that the Congressman talked about before, then maybe one of our goals should be to organize a constituency that will actually support a gas tax as a funding source for the new transportation bill. I mean, is that so far out of the realm of possibility? I mean, and why not? And what we need to do is we need to show people that that because of the sense of shared destiny, we need to work together. And sometimes, even when there's 10% unemployment, we need to ask people to make the right kinds of sacrifices for a longer-term goal that's going to benefit everyone. And then we ask the research community to get behind us and show how that's really revenue neutral. It's not going to actually cost anybody anything if they really understand it in kind of a longer frame. So I don't know. That's obviously not as specific as it should be, but I'll leave it there.
Jonathan?
I have a friend from Maryland, as a matter of fact, named Betsy Taylor, who says you have to retreat before you can advance. And John, you must have 24/7 demands, 110 programs. It must just be relentless. And I'd really encourage you and your colleagues to take the space to think. And it's so hard to think when every minute there's congressional pressure. You know all the pressures. And maybe you and Ron Sims should, and your colleagues should once a week just take a long walk together or something. I just think, no, I'm very serious. I think it's such a high pressure environment. Creating the space to let the right ideas emerge is one of the most precious and difficult things to find.
Congressman, would you like to offer any advice to?
If there were one little item, it would be to build on what the administration is doing with the federal government leading by example. I think it was so important, the executive order that we're going to on location. Blew me away when the FBI wanted to locate in the suburbs in Detroit because downtown was too dangerous. Which I'm sure would have contributed to a sense of safety and security in Bloomington Hills or something. It is so powerful that the federal government is investing in its facilities for energy conservation. What Speaker Pelosi is doing in greening the Capitol. The opportunity for the Department of Defense, as the largest consumer of energy in the world, to start implementing some of these items. Or your colleague Bob Peck at GSA, who is the right guy at the right time with a portfolio of over 300 million square feet. If we can get the federal government from the post office to the Department of Defense to the Department of Interior, leading by example, modeling the behavior we want for the rest of America, that in and of itself will be transformational. And I think you have actually made a good start on that. But my advice would be, force us to help you take that all the way.
Great. I've got one last piece of advice myself. I would say take the gift that is this Tiger program and all the applications that have come in. Fund what you can fund, and then maybe challenge our colleagues in philanthropy and other places to comb through those other proposals that came in and see what they might be able to do to help make some of those projects happen, even without federal funding, to make that whole effort that so many people have already spent so much time and energy on even more impactful. I think there might be a way to reach deeper with those communities. Maybe they'd be places where HUD's planning money could be put to use. But I think that it is a gift that so many different communities applied and that they came up with such creative proposals. Tragically, you won't have enough money to fund them all, but I think a lot of what you might want to see in a future reauthorization and a future state of transportation funding might be contained in some of those proposals. So please join me in thanking our panel.
Last word?
Oh, do you want?
You should get the last word.
The Congressman rightly pointed out that I should give the Deputy Secretary a chance to have the final word. Please, sir.
These are all great ideas, and this is a shared mission. We're in this together, and let me just underscore that what is happening at the local level with land use decisions, with consensus building on a sustainable future, that's the foundation that we're building on. It's not top down. So we really need your help with that. And again, we're going to be able to help those who help themselves. So the investments that communities have made, the hard money on planning and community involvement, the kinds of things that tend to fall by the wayside in a difficult economy, those are doubly important right now because those are the necessary precursors to getting these projects done.
Thank you, John. Thank you, panel.